This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're here with Chair Deborah Kafori and Sheriff Mike Reese. Our speakers are going to want to say a few words, and then we'll open it up for questions. Reporters who are in this Zoom app, you should have the power to unmute yourselves to ask the questions, and we'd ask you to stay on mute until then. If anyone's having trouble, if you need to record this, please raise your hand either in the chat or just say so, and we'll quickly authorize that. And we will be posting this video on YouTube after the briefing. And I'm going to give everybody Sarah. We're going to work through and try and get everybody who needs recording capability. Thanks for your patience. We're just going to make sure everybody has this ability. Mike? I think we might be ready to go. Let's see, it looks like we have two more. Chad? And we'll be ready to go. All right, so again, we're going to get started. I am going to ask Dan, if you could take your video off, please.
Julie, sorry to bother you. Could you give Tim Gordon permission as well, please, to record?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim, for speaking up. And we got your message. We just thought you were one person, not two.
Hi, it's Joe English from KATU. Can we record as well, please?
You bet.
Thank you.
Thanks for all staying with us through this technical challenge. And we're going to be beginning, and I'm going to be backing out. I'll keep my eye on if anybody needs anything. And if there are questions that we can't get to, we will have the ability to follow up with you later. And with that, I'll turn it over to Multnomah County Chair.
I'm so sorry, Dan McCarthy with K2 here, also unable to record if we can get that on our end as well. There's Dan McCarthy and Adam Worthington with K2.
Permission to record from KEX2.
Is everybody good? Dan, did you get everything?
I still do not have permission.
Dan, can you say your name again?
Dan McCarthy. I'm in as DJ McCarthy.
Just got him. I think I just got you. Try again.
Okay.
Thank you.
How about Gail Cunningham at KEX? Still don't have permission.
You're showing that you do have permission.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Chair Kafori, would you like to begin?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Deborah Kafori, your Multnomah County Chair. As you know, late Tuesday night, portions of the first floor of the Multnomah Building on the corner of Southeast Grand and Hawthorne were vandalized and set on fire. The Multnomah Building is the headquarters for Multnomah County, our state's largest safety net provider. It's a place where people in our community come to get married, come to get their passports, and come to celebrate their cultural traditions. We understand that the demonstration that took place in front of the Multnomah Building was largely peaceful until some of those who were part of the demonstration broke windows and set a fire in the Office of Community Involvement, a space dedicated to engaging community members who have been marginalized by the traditional political process. I am incredibly relieved that nobody was in the building at the time. The broken glass, smoke, and water is limited to the first floor, where since COVID-19, much of our region's personal protective equipment stock is being collected to be distributed to our hospitals and to our community members. If the fire had spread, or if that life-protecting equipment had been damaged by smoke and water, then healthcare workers, patients, and seniors would have paid the price for these actions last night. We are continuing to assess the damage and working to make sure any and all staff who have to enter the building can do so safely. The Multnomah Building is the third county building that has been damaged over the last several months of demonstrations. Both the Multnomah County Justice Center and the Central County Courthouse have incurred damage to a total of more than $1.3 million. Before I continue, I want to pause and speak directly to the county employees who have been serving our community throughout this pandemic and over the last 82 nights of protests, especially those who are working in our medical and behavioral health programs in the Justice Center, in corrections, and in domestic violence services. Your jobs are hard on the best of days, but the events of the last few months have made them even more challenging. And yet you come to work, you show up every day, bringing your dedication, your compassion, and your resilience to serve those in our community who are in crisis. So much of what the county does is focused on promoting the dignity, rights, and well-being of every Multnomah County resident, but especially those who are too often overlooked or underserved. Helping people get through a crisis and build toward a more hopeful future is at the heart of what Multnomah County does. We know that we are experiencing two pandemics in this country, COVID and systemic racism. And I want to be clear, we are fighting them both. Inequitable access to healthcare and economic disparities have placed our Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities and all communities of color at a greater risk of becoming infected and experiencing more severe impacts from this virus. That's why Multnomah County's COVID-19 response has centered the needs of our communities of color. That shows up in how we hire for emergency positions. It shows up in the organizations with whom we are partnering and the policy changes and budget decisions that we've made over the past 6 months. We are also in a moment in history where we as a community are seeking sweeping and transformative change in our criminal justice and safety systems. And I am committed to building a system focused on equity, diversion, restoration, and support. And at the same time, we know we must equally focus on the upstream investments that can change the future for thousands of children and families. That's housing, that's employment, and that's healthcare. We know that we have a lot of work to do. This county has been part of a violent and tragic history of oppression. We know the kind of community we want to become and that we can become, and I am committed to doing the work that it requires to achieve transformational change. Our community needs to work with us, and that includes those who have been protesting for weeks to demand racial justice, police accountability, and a more equitable society. Multnomah County is committed to the reimagination, the reflection, and the hard work that it's going to take to get us there. And we can do that when we work together. Thank you.
Sheriff Reese.
Thank you, Chair Kafoury. And I want to start by saying the Sheriff's Office strongly supports the right of people in our community to peacefully demonstrate. Our deputies have participated in marches against oppression and racism. Making transformational changes to our local criminal justice system is a top priority of mine. And we're working daily with our community partners, civic leaders, and service providers to provide and build a safe, equitable, and accountable public safety system that we can all be proud of in Multnomah County. However, criminal activity under the guise of peaceful protests should never be tolerated. A line is crossed when peaceful protests become violent. The unprovoked actions by those who engaged in criminal behavior last night is reprehensible. The damage and destruction profane and hate-filled graffiti, and setting fire to public buildings is simply violence. It serves no legitimate purpose. It does nothing to solve the problems and issues that our community is facing. As Chair Kafoury said, the Multnomah Building is a hub for public services. It's ground zero for our battle in the fight against COVID-19, where the county's information center is housed and where PPE is stored and distributed. Communications are distributed throughout the county, across the region, and these services were all interrupted by the activities last night. Our investigations unit, along with our agency partners, are reviewing video and other evidence to identify suspects who engaged in criminal activity last night so that we can hold them accountable for their actions. In closing, I want to thank the Portland Police Bureau for their swift and professional response to last night's criminal acts, and I condemn the pattern of violence occurring nightly in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Kafoury and Sheriff Reese. I'm going to now open it up to reporters' questions. We would ask you to respect the other members of the media here and ask one at a time. If you'd unmute yourself and go ahead, and we'll follow up with any unanswered questions. Go ahead.
Sheriff Reese, this is Maxine Bernstein from the Oregonian. We're at the, I think, 82nd or 83rd consecutive night. You said you condemn the pattern of violence that's occurring in our neighborhoods. What do you think needs to be done to stop this? What can be done?
Well, honestly, if I had an easy answer to that, I would have shared it with our agency partners and probably bottled it and sold it across the United States, because cities everywhere are facing these challenges. And it's not easy. I think that all of us have a responsibility for public safety in our community, and not just the Portland Police Bureau. We all should be condemning the violence that's occurring, the damage to public safety facilities, the assaults against community members and the police, and supporting our law enforcement professionals as they try and deal with these violent criminal activities that are occurring. We support the right of people to peacefully protest in our community. I took an oath to uphold those rights, and I take that very strongly. And we're going to do everything we can to keep our community safe, to keep the peace, and to allow people to engage in peaceful protests. That's probably one of the most challenging things in policing right now to do. And I really respect the hard work of our deputy sheriffs, the Portland police officers, and our Oregon State troopers in keeping the peace in our community.
I have a question for Deborah. Deborah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I don't know if you guys had one of these before in the 83 days since these protests began. Have you come out and condemned the violence? And is this the first time that a building, it seems to me, the first time a building that's not connected directly to the police has been attacked? And what do you make of that?
What I make of it is that there are a lot of people who are frustrated, and I understand the frustration, and I understand the need for transformational change, especially in the criminal justice system. And I've heard it time and time again from community leaders. And I urge the community to work together to help us change the system. Protests help drive change, but they are not an end in and of themselves.
Mike Reese, real quick question for you. One of the guys who was arrested last night was just arrested a week earlier. It seems like it's just a revolving door. These guys don't see any consequences for their actions. I'd like to get your take on that these people are just being let out immediately to just go back out and do the same thing again a week later if they want.
Well, I'm not familiar with the arrests that were made last night. I know that 2 people were arrested, but I don't know the charges or the circumstances or the previous charges the person faced. Certainly in our community, we have processes for folks that are being arrested. They have the right to bail in our system, as well as the right to being released on their own recognizance, particularly when we're arresting people on low-level criminal charges. Again, I'm not sure what they were arrested for last night, but if it were low-level criminal charges, then they're going to be released on their own recognizance, likely to face arraignment and accountability later as the district attorney files charges and the courts adjudicate the matter.
So the court system is working.
I think our one of the challenges we've had here in Multnomah County is that the Justice Center, the attacks on the Justice Center, particularly in that first May 29th and that first week of protests, the damage that was done to the Justice Center has kept the courts from having out-of-custody arraignments, because that is where our arraignment courts are located. So unfortunately, there's been disruptions because of the damage done to the Justice Center. There's been disruption to our criminal justice processes. There isn't the adjudication on a lot of matters, not just protest matters, but when community members are seeking access to victim services, the Justice Center is a location where those services are located. The courts have arraignment courts there, and then the Portland Police Bureau and the Sheriff's Office have our staff located there to provide public safety needs.
Gordon at KGW, if I could ask a question of Chair Kafoury. Chair Kafoury, Sheriff Reese spoke a little more directly to those who are doing damage, setting fires, breaking windows. Would you do that as well? What do you have to say directly to those who hurt the building last night and have done damage in the past?
Well, what I would say is that what happened last night at the Multnomah Building does not help us move the work forward and create the change that people are demanding. I have been and will continue to work with community leaders and organizations to take tangible steps that advance the work that we need to do to address inequities and injustices. And we need the community's involvement, but attacking the community involvement office and burning it is not helpful.
Thanks. Thank you for that. And if I could ask Sheriff Reese just a quick question as well. Sheriff, you were asked, what can you do about this? What can change? Is there any kind of strategy that allows something to be stopped before it starts? I mean, that seems to be the problem. We have these protests, and then down the road late at night, a smaller group starts doing damage. Can't that be shut down? And isn't there any strategy to shut that down before it starts?
Well, I think we saw last night the Portland Police Bureau respond swiftly and professionally once the fires were started and entry was made into the facility. Before that, it was largely a peaceful protest where people were in the street and engaged in relatively peaceful activities. And then it escalated into violence, and the Police Bureau responded appropriately to that. Again, these are events that are incredibly challenging for the police. We have to be fair and consistent in how we apply the law, so we're treating everybody the same. We have to be proportional in our response to the violence. We have to manage the few people who are engaged in violent activity when there may be a larger crowd that is present and not engaged in violence and maybe largely peacefully protesting. So again, I really commend the Portland Police Bureau, our deputy sheriffs, and the Oregon State Troopers for their good work in trying to manage really complex situations.
Sheriff Reese, this is Alex Zielinski with the Portland Mercury. Just kind of going off of what you just mentioned, and before you thanked Portland Police for having a swift and professional response to last night. Some videos taken from last night's protest showed officers beating protesters with batons, but not arresting them for being in the streets. Obviously, it's hard to see the whole picture through these clips, especially if we're not on the ground. But I'm curious if these responses are to setting a fire and to breaking into the building were appropriate in your mind.
Well, certainly we're seeing from people in that protest crowd violent behavior directed not just at facilities, but at community members and at the police. You've got people that are armed with rocks, balloons filled with paint. I've had, with our deputy sheriffs at the Justice Center, rocks and glass bottles thrown at us, ball bearings shot at us. The violence directed towards our law enforcement professionals is simply reprehensible. And there's accountability systems in place. If people have concerns about how the Portland Police Bureau responded, there are certainly strong accountability systems in place to deal with that.
Sheriff Reese, Zane Sparling with the Portland Tribune. I understand the recent Multnomah County budget included some cuts to your office. There were cuts in the booking department, corrections lieutenant, school resource officer, shutting down another jail dorm. You mentioned that people in this county are often let out on recognizance, and of course the number of jail beds has a huge impact on that. So I was wondering, do you think that those cuts have made your job harder?
I think there may be a misperception in the community that jail beds and release back into the community are tied together. The release of people back into our community is set by the presiding judge's order, and that guides the decision making that happens with our Department of Community Justice staff located in the jail. They're looking at the charges that a person's coming in on, and they use a scoring tool to decide whether or not that person, based on past behavior and their risk to the community and their risk of not appearing, should they be released back in under that PJO order. So that's what's guiding release decisions in our community. And then once a person makes it to arraignment, so if they stay in custody, then they're arraigned before a judge, who again has an opportunity to take an independent look at each person and decide whether or not they should be released and how they should be released. We support the pretrial release supervision program, so often judges will release people back into the community with some sort of supervision mechanism in place. And again, we're a part of that, along with our partners at the courts and Department of Community Justice.
Thank you, Sheriff. I'm just curious, do you support the cuts? I know the protesters would probably like the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office to be cut much more.
Well, I think it's really challenging to look at reducing our public safety systems, particularly our jail systems in a pandemic. We're trying to create safe housing for everyone in custody. We've actually spread people out in our housing modules so that they have more physical distance between them. We're working closely with the chair's office on finding that right balance.
Sheriff Reese, this is Sarah Hurwitz with Channel 12. Thank you so much for handling all of these questions thrown at you. I'm curious, does this change your approach at all, the Sheriff's Department's approach in handling these protests now with the county building that's been targeted?
The short answer is no. We're focused on protecting the adults in custody and the staff that work with them, providing rehabilitative services at the Justice Center, and then working with the Portland Police Bureau to ensure the safety of our public safety buildings in the downtown core area. As the chair mentioned, the Multnomah County Courthouse has come under attack, as well as the Hatfield Courthouse. We're working with system partners on creating a safe space there, particularly for occupied buildings like the Justice Center, where we have a moral obligation and a legal obligation to protect the adults in custody and the staff that work there.
Sheriff, it's Joe English from KATU. Are citizens simply to expect that protesters and rioters get to go wherever they want, do whatever they want in the name of protest? And the second side to that question, what kind of reconnaissance is being done, if any? I know you can't give away your secrets, but what kind of prep work is being done to perhaps stop this before it happens?
Well, again, I think the easy answer to that is that we as a community support the right of people to engage in peaceful, lawful protests. I think that's a hallmark of a healthy democracy, when people can express their voices and their concerns about a variety of issues, whether it's a labor protest, an issue at a school, or a march against government. We support the right of people to engage in those peaceful protests. It's challenging work. Often there are protests almost every day in Portland, and often they need no police interaction. They're able to manage those events safely, and the police may not even be aware that they're occurring when there is a need for public safety to be present. So often we will get people that want to engage in a demonstration calling us and asking for assistance in creating a safe space, so stopping traffic from flowing into that area. We're there to assist them and protect them. In other times when there is the possibility of criminal activity, we're there to maintain the safety of our entire community and balance the competing rights that we enjoy in our community. As I said earlier, it's really complicated work. We support the right of people to peacefully protest, but there's also other rights that people have in our community. The right to use our public transportation systems and get safely from one place to another. It's incredibly challenging work, and we're committed to doing everything we can to keep the peace and working within community values and expectations on how we do that.
Sheriff, so I think we have time for about 2 more questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, a question for the sheriff. I mean, based on night after night of violence, why wouldn't law enforcement be taking preemptive action? In other words, to station officers around the building last night to prevent what was likely going to happen at some point?
Well, that's a good question. I know that the Portland Police Bureau has limited resources, and they're not, the people that are engaged in the criminal activity last night are not sharing with the Portland Police or the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office which building they're going to attack that night. Often we are assuming that they're headed to a certain building based on the location that they're gathering in, but that's not always the case. And so the Police Bureau is trying to use their limited resources effectively. Some of that is simply being responsive to the fact that each night is different. We don't know necessarily who's going to be participating, what their intent is, and whether or not they'll engage in criminal activity until they actually engage in that criminal activity. So they're taking an approach that allows for peaceful protests, but when criminal activity begins to happen, then they're going to step in and do everything they can to protect people and property from damage.
Hi, this is for either the chair or the sheriff. If you can talk more about exactly what damage occurred inside the building, and was the lobby open for business at all? Has it been open to the public or staff in the last month or so? And the 1.3 million, did that include the damage from last night?
We're still assessing the extent of last night's damage. The building has not been open to the public. It has been open for essential employees, and it's also been the place where some of our emergency operations staff are working. As I said, we have been stocking and stockpiling personal protective equipment, PPE, in that location, and that's being distributed to community organizations and to healthcare and hospitals. The 1.3 million, it's my understanding that does not yet include the damage from last night, as we are still trying to assess the financial impacts of that. And I don't know, Sheriff Reese, if you have any other details on the damage that occurred last night.
I do not.
We're happy to follow up with you, Max, as we learn more.
We appreciate, we are out of time, and we appreciate the time that you all took, Chair Kafoury and Sheriff Reese, to join us. And thank you to everyone who's joined us from the media. We will post this on YouTube, and if you have a question, my email, Chris Lytle's email, is at the top of the media avail. Please send it to us, and we'll try to get back to you with more specifics. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Said recording.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.